know about the building NFTs in the Gala Games world of Mirandus. In part 2 of this 3-part series called Mirandus by the Numbers, we are going to take a look at the building NFTs. So buckle up, this is a good one. Let's dig in. Welcome to Mirandus Life. I'm Jesse, and today's episode is all about the buildings. If you're new to the channel and you haven't yet subscribed, you might want to do that and go ahead and jab that notification bell so you don't miss upcoming episodes. Now, what exactly do we know about the buildings? Well, we know that a ton of them have been sold. We know their prices, we know their quantity, we know their rarity, and we even know their size. Each of them has a very brief description, so there's a lot left to the imagination.
In a world of pure imagination.
Now, there are approximately 19,500 building NFTs that are currently minted for Mirandus. Now, all of these have an approximate total sales value of $12 million.
Damn!
Now, it is curious to note that there are far more buildings sold than there are actual building plots available on the known non-Citadel land deeds. In fact, all of the non-Citadel land deeds can only accommodate 7,340 buildings. So then the question becomes, where are you going to put the other 12,000 buildings?
Wow, that's a great question.
The Citadels? Highly unlikely. Now, the Gala team has suggested that it's always been a part of the plan to have many more buildings than there are building plots to place them. They suggest that this is so that there are no empty building plots during gameplay. And so with many more buildings, it creates building plot scarcity. Now, we are a long way away from knowing what the impact will be on building plot rent. It's quite possible that you might not be able to afford rent for a building that you already own unless you also own a land deed to place it on.
Gonna pay you. I'm working 3 jobs right now, working nights.
Just slip the rent under my door.
Time will tell. But all of that is a question for another video. Here in this video, I want to take a closer look at all of the building NFTs and how we might use them. Now, out of all the NFTs that have been released, buildings present the greatest amount of clues about what we might expect and how we might interact within the world of Mirandus. Now, the first thing to understand about buildings is that they come in a variety of sizes, from the 5x5 stand all the way up to the 20x40 majestic size building. Now, the majestic buildings, you will only find these buildings within the walls of a citadel. Now, each of the buildings are also assigned a rarity type. Now, you may recall, if you had a chance to watch the Land Deeds NFT video, I did cover rarity. Now, the first thing to know about all NFTs in Mirandus is that they are all assigned to one of 6 categories of rarity: common, uncommon, rare, epic, legendary, and ancient. Now, for the sake of this video, I've done something unique that you won't find anywhere else. I've taken the time to categorize each of the building NFTs and put them all into 5 main categories. This will help us to better understand the world of Mirandus. Those 5 categories are basic needs, providers, crafting, storage, and adventuring. Now, each of these main categories have one or more subcategories, as you'll soon discover. Now, let's begin with the basic needs category. Now, in the basic needs category, we have 4 subcategories: shelter, nourishment, healing, and travel beasts. Let's look at each one. Shelter. In the land of Mirandus, it's pretty clear that shelter plays a very important role. After all, this is an adventure simulator. Shelter starts at the smallest 5x5 tent. Then it moves up to the 10x10 camp. From there, we have a 10x20 large inn. And then we have a 20x20 grand inn. Now, the very largest of the shelters is the 20x40 majestic inn, which you're only going to find within the walls of a citadel. While we still do not know much about the game mechanics of Mirandus, we do know that the well-being of your avatar is impacted by the quality of rest that they get at one of these shelters. Now, the next basic subcategory is nourishment. This comes in the form of food and drink at one of the 3 tavern buildings. Now, there is no 5x5 building in this category, nor is there a majestic building at this time. The three sizes of buildings dedicated to Nourishment are the 10 by 10 Tavern, the 10 by 20 Large Tavern, and the 20 by 20 Grand Tavern. Nourishment is hinted to play a role in the overall health and well-being of your avatar. The next basic needs subcategory is healing. Temples are hinted at being the place to go for healing and blessings. They may also be a training facility for the clerics in the healing arts profession. The temples come in four sizes: the 10 by 10 temple, the 10 by 20 large temple, the 20 by 20 grand temple, and the 20 by 40 majestic temple. The majestic temple is said to offer immortality for the wealthy, which suggests that for the right coin, resurrection from death may even be possible here. Next, we have buildings for travel beasts. Getting from place to place can take time, and having a beast to mount will get you there a whole lot faster. There are 5 buildings dedicated to travel beasts of the land, beginning with the most modest 5x5 hitching post. Now, you don't want to lose old Betsy as you enjoy a frosty tankard of ale. There's also the 10 by 10 stable, the 10 by 20 large stable, the 20 by 20 grand stable, and the 20 by 40 majestic stable, which suggests that there are plans to have some epic mounts within the game. Now, this last subcategory is not exactly basic needs for the living, but rather for the dead, and that is the cemetery. These are minted NFTs, so we do know that they will be a part of the game of Mirandus, but we don't yet know their role or even how death works in the game. There are 3 known sizes at this time: the 10 by 10 cemetery, the 10 by 20 large cemetery, and the 20 by 20 grand cemetery. And yes, folks are dying to get in. And now we move on to the next main category of building types in Mirandus: the providers. This category is all about the buildings that supply the nourishment for our bodies in the form of food and drink. There are 2 subcategories of buildings: farming and ranching. Let's begin with the farming buildings. There are 4 sizes of granary buildings: the 5x5 simple granary, the 10 by 10 granary, the 10 by 20 large granary, and the 20 by 20 grand granary. Next, we have the mills, beginning with the 5x5 grain stand, the 10 by 10 mill, and the 10 by 20 large mill. Now it's time to turn this grain into other goods. There's a 5x5 bread stand, the 10 by 10 bakery, and the 10 by 20 large bakery. And finally, we have 2 brewery buildings.
How is it, Jan? Tell us.
It's beautiful.
The 10 by 10 brewery and the 10 by 20 large brewery. And that brings us to all of the buildings in the ranching subcategory, beginning with the barns. There's a 10 by 10 barn and a 10 by 20 large barn. Now, we have 3 meat-related buildings. There's the 5x5 meat stand, there's the 10 by 10 butchery, and there's the 10 by 20 butchery.
Did you say steak?
And finally, a few buildings for the not lactose intolerant. There's the 5x5 milk stand, there's the 10 by 10 dairy, and there is the 10 by 20 large dairy. And now we move into the largest category of buildings, and that is crafting. There are 7 subcategories in this group. Crafting is clearly set to be a large part of the world of Mirandus. What are those 7 subcategories? We have Metallurgy, we have Woodworking, Alchemy, Enchanting, Tailoring, Tanning, and Masonry. There are 5 Metallurgy buildings: the 5x5 simple forge, the 10 by 10 forge, the 10 by 20 large forge, the 20 by 20 grand forge. Oddly enough, this building has been minted, but it's not listed in the Gala store. And then there is the 20 by 40 majestic forge, which likely has a magical flame that burns hotter than the 7 hells. Now, there's only 3 buildings related to woodworking. There's the 5x5 wood stand, the 10 by 10 wood shop, and the 10 by 20 large wood shop. For the most basic of wooden items to the finest beds and furniture, they're crafted here in these shops. Nearly all of the buildings in Mirandus will rely on the woodworkers for their craftsmanship. Now that brings us to alchemy in the potion buildings. You simply can't have a magical land without an assortment of elixirs and concoctions. There are currently 3 potion buildings: the 5x5 potion stand, the 10 by 10 potion shop, and the 10 by 20 large potion shop. Throughout all gaming worlds, potions have a history of creating instant buffs and stat changes. I expect the potion business to be very active in Mirandus. Next, we have Enchanting. In this subcategory, all of the jewelry buildings. Now, there's really nothing in the lore that suggests that jewelry shops are related to enchanting. However, if you're going to pay to have jewels inlaid into weapons, chances are that you're not going to waste your money only for the aesthetics. The jeweler is likely associated with the buffs that their work can provide to wearable items like rings, and weapons too. There are 3 jeweler buildings: the 5x5 jewelry stand, the 10x10 jeweler, and the 10x20 large jeweler. Now, there are 3 additional categories or subcategories of the crafting category, but those have not been released, but they have been minted, so we know they will exist in the land. And those would be tailoring, tanning, and masonry. There are 3 known clothier buildings: the 5x5 clothes stand, the 10x10 outfitter, and the 10x20 large outfitter. By the way, both the large outfitter and the large jeweler, as well as the large potion shop, are all listed as legendary buildings. These are the only large buildings that have this rarity association. Now, it goes on to say with regard to the clothier buildings that this is where wool and linen goods are sold, as well as clothing of all grades of finery. There are 3 tanning buildings: the 5x5 simple tannery, the 10x10 tannery, and the 10x20 large tannery. This is where you'll find the production of leather goods that can later be crafted into boots, tack, armor, and other leather good items. Now, there's 2 known masonry buildings: the 10x10 Stoncraft shop and the 10x20 large Stoncraft shop. The masons craft the foundation stones of the growing settlements. Also, it is said that the master clerics rely on the masons for the centerpieces within the temples. Now, that wraps up the known crafting buildings.
It is known.
It is known.
With all those crafting components and finished goods, you're going to need a place to store them, as well as store all those food goods that were created, all the perishables, the meat, the milk, the bread. All of those things have to have a place to be stored as well. And that brings us to our next building category: storage. There are 4 known sizes of storehouses in the land of Mirandus: the 5x5 simple storehouse, the 10x10 storehouse, the 10x20 large storehouse, and the 20x20 grand storehouse. These storehouses will store both perishable consumables like food and drink, and they will also store the crafting components and finished crafting goods. Now, that brings us to the final building category: adventuring. And here's where you'll find the buildings of Mirandus that are associated with armor and weapons. Whether you're dungeon crawling or out hunting for food and skins, you'll need to protect and arm yourself. There are 5 armor and 5 weapon buildings: the 5x5 stand, the 10x10 shop, the 10x20 large shop, the 20x20 grand shop, the 20x40 majestic shops that can only be found within the walls of a citadel. And finally, we have 3 buildings dedicated to the art of archery: the 5x5 archery stand, the 10x10 archery, and the 10x20 large archery. And my friends, that covers all of the known buildings in the land of Mirandus.
It is known.
It is known.
Now, there's a good chance that we will see more, but for now, that is all that is known.
It is known.
It is known.
So how will you participate in the land of Mirandus? Will you choose just to stay close to home and only have the basic needs like shelter and nourishment? Or will you venture out and go from village to village, thereby needing a travel steed? If you venture too far, will you need the healing services of a temple? And if you get in over your head, death may come calling. Will you choose to be a provider and till the soils of the land, producing grain, crafting the finest of ales? Will you bake delectable breads, cakes, and pies? Will you raise the finest of meats in the kingdom? Perhaps dairy goods like milk and cheese are your thing. Or will you join a crafters guild, hammering away at the forge, carving the finest of woods, brewing magical potions, enchanting items with jewels, tailoring the finest of clothing, tanning the rarest of hides, or carving stone into masterpieces? Perhaps you want to run a village storehouse, and yet you might want to equip adventurers with the best armor and weapons. And then there are those who want to craft the most unique bows and arrows. Now, whatever you choose to do, it seems that there's going to be a lot of options and choices for how you play your role in Mirandus. Leave a comment below and share your plans. Did you enjoy this video? Leave a like. New to the channel? You might want to subscribe and be sure to jab that announcement bell so that you don't miss what I'm going to share next. In the next video and the last of the 3-part series titled Mirandus by the Numbers, we're going to be talking all about Avatar NFTs. Until then, Jesse out.